in tickets. Now let's talk about the Yang Gang. There was this phenomenon on the internet a few days ago, or maybe a week ago. I've titled one of my episodes, "I am sensing a disruption in the mimetic force," if you will, or something like that. There was a shift on the internet in the enthusiasm that is building around Andrew Yang, this Democrat Party candidate, and he seems to have absorbed a lot of the enthusiasm that was previously directed at Trump. People have been disappointed with Trump, particularly on Israel-related question, the military, and on actual accomplishments. Are you on the Yang Gang or not? That's the only question that matters.
Oh, yes, very much so. I immediately saw the value of this guy, just like everybody else did. It was really his Joe Rogan appearance, I think, that flipped the switch for a lot of people. It came at the right moment. Trump had majorly betrayed us, basically in his State of the Union address, where he ad-libbed this thing. The boomer con took over for a moment, and he ad-libbed this thing. I want as many people as possible to come here, as long as they come here legally. And that was disastrous, because he doubled down on that, and now they're rolling out this idea that because the economy is so good, we need to debase the ethnic composition of our country even further by inviting more people from what Trump himself called shithole countries to come in, and because it's good for, quote unquote, our corporations. This is pure Republican garbage, and it is a complete repudiation of populism. It's a complete repudiation of the central issue that got many of us excited about Trump. And we do not belong to some cringy personality cult like a lot of Republicans, a lot of MAGA-peed Republicans. We only supported Trump because he supported certain things that we liked. He has now betrayed us utterly on the most important issue, and we have turned on a dime. And wonderfully, right at the moment when we were most disappointed with Trump, this Chinese guy, Yang, comes along, and he seems like an intelligent and sincere fellow. He is opposed to anti-white identity politics. He's the only person in the Democratic field who's openly opposed to that. He has actually talked about problems that afflict white America: the opioid crisis, the suicide epidemic, the social decline of white America due to globalization. And he has proposed a number of measures that are soundly populist. And these are measures that I have actually been proposing and standing up for within the realm of white nationalism for years now. One is the idea of a universal basic income. I wrote an article at the beginning of 2012 called Money for Nothing. It's out at Countercurrents.
Wow.
It's also on YouTube. And the Money for Nothing article is my little synthesis of social credit economic ideas, including the idea of a universal basic income. I also came out in favor of debt repudiation. I think we need mass debt repudiation. And Yang has spoken about student loan debt repudiation in particular, which I think is very, very important. So these are very good measures. These would be good for white Americans. And a lot of white Americans, racially conscious white Americans like myself, we're done with Trump. And we are looking for a new candidate who might advance certain white ethnic interests in the next election cycle. And Yang is the only guy. Yang is the only one. We've heard it all from Trump before. We saw what happened at the midterm election when the party had a near-death experience, and suddenly Trump was out there talking about the issues that got him elected again. He was talking about issuing an executive order on birthright citizenship. He has still not issued that, by the way. I really suspected that if he, put it this way, I suspected we'd never get that order. I hoped we would get it, but I knew that if we didn't get that order, this would be the sign that Trump is a fraud. Basically, he was conning us. He was
Which order
saying the
are you
stuff that
talking about? The free
the
speech order?
no, the executive order that he talked about last October about ending birthright citizenship. That idea,
Ah,
the anchor baby phenomenon. He still hasn't made that executive order. The very fact
mhm.
that he said, "I'm thinking about an executive order," made me suspicious because he should have just done it. If he was serious about it, we should have woken up one morning and the news would have been there's an executive order ending anchor babies. That would have been epic and that would have advanced white ethnic interests enormously. But he didn't do it. He just trotted it out as an inducement to get his voters to the polls to vote for worthless Republican shills and get more of those people back in office. And that's what happened. But he didn't come through with that, and that's a bad sign. And then this terrible betrayal on immigration, wages, globalization, the whole shebang really has, I think, finally gotten most people off the Trump train. And it's not so much that we're off the Trump train; it's that Trump got off the Trump train, right? he
Yeah.
got off. He at the first exit. The first exit. I wrote my "God Emperor No More" article about Trump in April of 2017, almost 2 years ago after the Syria strike. I really started believing that things had gone very, very wrong, that maybe we had made a terrible mistake. Not that we had a better choice in Hillary Clinton, but we might have made a terrible mistake in thinking that this guy was actually had the character to keep the promises that he made to white America.
I fully agree that essentially the Trump train is still going on, but Trump is out and we've removed the label, and now this whole enthusiasm was looking for another target, and Andrew Yang out of nowhere shows up. On the anti-white, the resistance against anti-white sentiment, Andrew Yang is testing a minimal kit of it. Because he's not saying something that could qualify, at least from our side, as white nationalism, but he's saying we should be empathic to white people. Now that is the edgiest thing you can try into the left, into the Democrat Party. And this is where I think he's a bad politician. Will he be able to gather a base within the Democrat Party to pass the first stages of the primaries to become a good candidate for the Democrats? I have no doubt that it would be good in an election to adopt this kind of centrist but sympathetic to white position. But is it too early to have done it right before the primaries?
I don't really know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's a good question to raise. I think it was smart at least to get himself. We'll put it this way: he's a total unknown candidate, or he was before he started saying these things, and now he's on the map, and now he's qualified for the debates. I think that it might not have been a bad idea if he can keep this momentum going. And I see considerable enthusiasm and considerable momentum. I think that when normal white Americans actually hear some of his proposals, they're going to get enthusiastic too. Right now, it's political junkies in the white nationalist scene who are excited about it. But we're like the early warning system, right? We're very attuned to these sorts of things. That it hasn't gotten out to John Q. Public yet, and when it does, though, I think a lot of people who voted for Trump in, say, upper Midwest states, people who were the so-called Reagan Democrats back in the 80s and 70s, I guess in the 80s, those are the people who are going to be suddenly looking to Yang and thinking this guy makes sense. What Americans want is a socially conservative interventionist state that looks out for the interests of the working class and the middle class. And we never get to vote on that straight up, right? The Republicans will pay lip service to conservative values, but never deliver on them. They will
Mm-hmm.
deliver, however, tax cuts to billionaires. They'll give the oligarchs what they want. The Democrats talk about the little guy and interventionism and stuff like that, but it's always packaged with ultra liberal cultural Marxist pause. And they always end up going along with the neoliberal globalist agenda too. And so what we've got is we've got a system where we have an oligarchy that basically wants globalization and ultra left-wing degenerate values. And we've got a populace that wants socially conservative values and anti-globalization and interventionist state looking out for the middle class and the working class. That's what the people want. The people never get what they want. The oligarchs always get what they want. We have this weird system where, the Democrats and the Republicans trade office. And when they're in the office, people vote for Republicans because they want the social conservatism and they don't get it. But the oligarchy gets their tax cuts and they get their wars, right? And people vote for Democrats because they want to get the interventionist state, but they don't even get that. They get more globalization, and they get trannies on TV and stuff like that. And it just always drifts in the direction of what the oligarchy, the elites want, not what the people want. We hoped that Trump was going to realign that, but he ended up doing exactly what the other Republicans do. He did what was easiest, and what was easiest was to give in to the globalists, and that's what he's done. So we're through with him. We look at Yang. Yang obviously isn't going to talk about conservative values, but he is talking about really radical interventions in economic life by the state that will have potentially revolutionary consequences. And I'd really like to talk about some of the things connected with universal basic income, because it is a potentially revolutionary idea and will unseat significant parts of this oligarchy that rules us.
Absolutely. And you were saying Trump is disappointing, and we may have some insight into the mechanism of how does a president go from speaking anti-globalism in the election and then being essentially bullied and being purchased by the interests that have controlled previous government. Today, Clinton and newly revealed emails discuss classified foreign policy matters, secretive private communications channel with Israel. We now have new email from Hillary Clinton, and it shows that the people in power have the people that are part of the deep state, if you will, the staff members of the president, Obama back in the days, and her as being a Secretary of State, they are essentially explaining to them, look, if you don't change your policy to be more pro-Israel, you're going to have 600 newspaper after you. And they're essentially threatening the President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton that if they're not pro-Israel enough, they're going to be smeared in the mainstream media as being anti-Semite. It's funny to be looking at these emails as they pop out. It leaves no doubt to me that our politicians are being subject of extortion, essentially emotional extortion. And poor Donald Trump, he is so sensitive about this, being smeared, having his name dragged in the mud. He doesn't like this, and it's natural for a businessman in the marketing sphere to not like this, but you need to have some balls if you're going to be in politics. We elect you precisely because we want a protection against that kind of control over our personalities. But indeed, let's talk about UBI. UBI, it is I think I've never seen that in any political proposition. It's a proposition where everyone seems to think that they're gonna get the best out of it. The left, the right, the center. It's magical.
Yeah, well, what UBI does is this. Basically, first of all, we need money. There needs to be money injected into the economy so so people can buy stuff, right? The way that money is created in the economy today is very peculiar. We could simply have the state create money out of nothing, pure fiat currency. But we have this bizarre situation where the government will actually borrow money that they could create themselves. and we have to, and then have to pay this back at interest. And there are people, though, who simply create money through bookkeeping, and this is really the magic of banking. Banks create money out of nothing, loan it out to people, and then they have they create contracts where you have to pay back the principal plus interest, right? They create money out of nothing. You have to pay it back plus interest, and that gives them a permanent cut of all future economic activity that's funded with borrowing. The universal basic income idea basically would inject money into the economy, not through allowing banks to create it and loan it out at interest. It would simply give it away. It would give everybody $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month. In my UBI program, it's going to be $2,000 a month. So vote Johnson, right? But anyway, what we would do is we'd simply give everybody a certain amount of money every month that they can spend. And what that would allow us to do is cut out the banks as creators of money that therefore get to basically get income from interest for all eternity, or till there's an economic crisis and a lot of these loans are written off. But also it also allows us to get rid of the social welfare bureaucracy, because we give away a huge amount of money anyway, in the form of things like unemployment insurance and subsidies for this and that. All of this is administered by bureaucrats. All of it is funded by tax dollars or borrowing. And we could just get rid of these middlemen, the bureaucrats and the social welfare bureaucracy and the bankers, and inject liquidity directly into the pockets of people who are going to go out and spend money. And I think that's a very interesting and clever idea. And there are people who say, "Oh my gosh, this will cause inflation." Well, no, not really. There is this idea going around, which is sort of true, that if you increase the money supply arbitrarily, people will discount money, the value of money, and therefore what happens is the dollar, or whatever, the Zimbabwe dollar especially, will purchase less and less, right, as people discount the value. And this is what inflation is. It's the devaluation of money due to overproduction of money. There are ways of avoiding that. One way of avoiding that, well, first of all, it doesn't always happen. You'd think that if this was an iron law of economics, every time you vastly increase the amount of money, there would be hyperinflation. Since 2008, the amount of dollars has been increased by trillions in these bailouts that took place, and yet we did not have hyperinflation. So increasing the money supply doesn't always lead to the discounting of the value of the money. It certainly does in Zimbabwe. It hasn't done that in the United States. There's something more complicated going on than simply supply and demand working with this commodity of money. Something else. I have an article at Countercurrents called The Austrian Economic Apocalypse, where I talk about this idea, and it's related to social credit. But anyway, so not necessarily.
No, it's true that
necessarily the case. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to comment on this before we move to other commenting, because I think that you are correct. And as a libertarian, I have ultimate oppositions to UBI. But when we're talking about alternatives, about UBI as being an alternative for the current corrupt system, I say absolutely yes. I mean, first, there's the point of the social welfare. Absolutely, we will get rid of bureaucracy. It's going to be so easy. Everyone gets $1,000. And then, I really love your comment on we're doing inflationary drives into, we're printing money anyway. So we would just be changing the way we print money, whereby instead of benefiting a handful of people controlling the Fed and the relation between the Fed and the government, it would essentially be, you would have to pass through the people to make this money enter the system. And I like it.
Exactly.
On your point that there is not necessarily a an inflationary drive, it is also true. You can increase the amount of money in the system, and there's just conditions for this, for this not to be causing an inflationary or devaluation of money. There needs to be an equivalent growth of the system of biological beings that are essentially creating their homes, they are living lives, they are consuming. If there's more people, then putting more money in will not devalue all of the money, because there would be an equivalent increase in work, in productivity, and in goods. However, if you do it totally artificially, and if there's no other growth, there's no progress of your technology, then yes, there's a point at which you would print money, and theoretically, everyone who already has money would essentially be less rich.
Exactly. Yes, you can basically structure the UBI to inject money into the economy at a rate that's commensurate with the growth of the economy, such that there's always going to be, if you increase the money supply, you'll increase it proportionate with the increase in work, goods and services, whatever out there, so people aren't just going to discount the money. There are people who are actually saying, if you have $1,000 a month, everything is going to get more expensive. Well, these are people who actually claim to follow the basic rules of economics, but I'm sorry, I don't recall reading in the economics textbook that suppliers have this superpower of raising prices arbitrarily. Because my income has gone up over the years, and it wasn't immediately sucked up by rent increases, right? Because there are market conditions, and suppliers can't just arbitrarily raise their rates. If there's a large supply of apartments, for instance, landlords can't arbitrarily raise rents, right? Or you'll just find a better place. But there are actually people who are going around saying it'll just cause all of the prices to rise. Well, that is not necessarily true. It's not necessarily true because sellers don't have the superpower of arbitrarily raising prices just because they think they can. There are objective economic conditions that constrain them from doing that. And in fact, in some cases, we have entire sectors of the economy where prices are falling. Right? If they had this superpower, why is the price of computing generally falling, and has been falling dramatically for decades now? So there are areas in the economy where prices of things are going down because of competition, innovation, and so forth. There is no necessary argument, therefore, there's no reason to believe that just having a UBI is going to cause everybody's prices to go up. Businesses simply don't have the power to do that.
As much as I can agree on everything we've just said in principle and in theory, there remains to be the case that the UBI that will be implemented by Andrew Yang will treat it as an alternative to social welfare as opposed to an addition to it. And there is the big question of whether it will essentially replace the inflationary and printing of money drive into the economy by the UBI rather than do it through the top. It will essentially be a bottom-up printing of money rather than a top-down printing of money. And I have to say, I have my doubts on this. What will happen when the states want to have their own social welfare programs and people are already benefiting? Let's say there's a single mother receiving money for her child. How would that arrimate to the federal check of $1,000? I'm not sure it will always be an alternative, a non-doubling alternative to currently existing social welfare systems.
Right. Yeah. I mean that's a legitimate question. It would depend on certain changes with jurisdictions and in the United States. I mean the federal government would have to trump certain powers of the states to hand out funds of their own. I think that's an interesting question. It's another weakness of American federalism, or at least American federalism would certainly put an impediment in the way of a UBI in that sense.
Another issue I take with UBI is, will it have a destabilizing effect on families? Because it's very individual based. It's like, okay, you're a woman or you're a man, you get 1,000. That means families only get 2,000, really. And they don't have there's no pressure for not divorcing, if you will. Will there be more families
Right.
broken by this?
I think that there may be more families that aren't formed. I would like to see a system, and of course, this is outrageously sexist, where the money would go to the head of the family, basically, um, and so you know, a single woman, I guess, could get this. You'd have to have that sort of system. I would, however, say that you really should include a UBI for children too. You should actually incentivize people having children. And of course, the people that we should most incentivize are the people with high IQs and things like that. And that is problematic too. There are a number of things about the UBI that I think are extremely potentially revolutionary, but also would entail making dramatic conservative changes in society. So, for instance, if you're going to be giving out $1,000 a month to every adult, we're going to have to close that border really fast. I mean, we're already being inundated with people who are coming here for Gibbs. And when the Gibbs, become so clear, and simple, $1,000 a month, deposited right into your, card or whatever, that is just going to create an additional surge of people wanting to come here and take, right, from America. It's going to necessitate immigration controls. Now, Yang hasn't talked about this, but he's not stupid. He knows this, and he's going to have to finesse this. He's going to have to square the circle with the white dispossession crowd that runs the Democratic Party. But we know that if this goes through, we're going to have to put limits on immigration. Another thing that we'll have to deal with is the following. In the present day culture, where there's a massive uh, cultural emphasis on individualism and hedonism and self-indulgence, and where there is a ready supply of all kinds of highly addictive and destructive habits that people can get involved in. And I'm not just talking about drugs and alcohol. I'm talking about things like video gaming and porn and stuff like that. Having $1,000 a month is going to enable a lot of people to basically just destroy their lives or waste their lives. And that's, I think, a truly concerning thing. Maybe, some hard-nosed sort of social Darwinist type will say, yes, the quickest way to get rid of all these junkies is just to hand them a bag of $1,000. You might as well just hand them a bag of pure heroin, right? And they'll be gone. In 48 hours, half the junkies in Seattle will be dead. I mean, that's tough love in the eyes of some people. I don't like that idea personally. I'd like to have a society where we don't simply enable people to destroy themselves. We actually try and help people, avoid these life-destroying addictions and life-wasting addictions. I would love to see, limitations on internet porn and limitations on gaming and other addictive behaviors. And these disproportionately affect whites and Asians too. So that, I think, is something that if we got a UBI, there would be a growing pressure to institute certain sensible paternalistic changes. We would have to really stress in our education system, giving people the ability to have access to more edifying forms of culture, not just self-indulgence, and to be more public-spirited, not just individualistic and self-indulgent, because having a universal basic income really would enable a lot of people to just be consumed by their worst vices. And I don't want to see that.
It is one concern. Another concern is the absence, the fact that there's a safety net removes any form of falling down, being totally down to the ground. And it gives a kind of minimum under which you cannot fall. And from an evolutionary perspective, that's very worrying, because there's one way in which a safety net is not absolutely dysgenic. but there's also other ways in which societies could develop to develop lifestyles around this poor lifestyle where, for example, you could have single mothers that have an evolutionary strategy to just make lots of babies, and they would essentially find a way to survive with 12,000 a month, probably living in small boxes, apartments that would essentially get smaller and smaller until we can maximize the kind of money we can drain from these social welfare recipients, essentially. And that is worrying from an evolutionary perspective, because it can drive our society toward less IQ, less productivity, people who are evolving toward being lesser beings, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, you do not want to create, you know, it would be a ghastly farce if human social and technological evolution, right, were to culminate in a world where everybody becomes just a consumer blob in a hover chair, like in that cartoon Wall-E. You know, we do not want to have this dysgenic world where everyone's Homer Simpson. And he's got imagine Homer Simpson on the Starship Enterprise with the replicator, creating donuts and duff and just becoming increasingly obese. That would be a ghastly, farce. That would not be utopia. That would be dystopia. So if we were to move in this direction, we would have to be concerned with raising the level of education, culture, taste, virtue, right? And also the genetic potential of future generations, because without that, this sort of thing would encourage dysgenics and social devolution, and we don't want to do that. So yeah, it's a very, very attractive thing, though. And once people get their fists around their 1,000 a month, they're and you say, well, we've got to take it away because there are too many kids who are just wasting their lives on video games. People are going to say, ban video games. I want my $1,000 a month. Screw them. Take away their video games. There would actually be a kind of incentive once this thing got started to get people to support socially conservative measures to make sure that this isn't just a way of ruining ourselves and devolving rather than making it possible to evolve. And for me, the sort of utopian potential of the universal basic income idea is this. Well, first of all, there are lots of people who are creative types, artists, intellectuals, people like that. It would be amazing if people like that had $1,000 a month. They can get a little studio apartment. They can strum their guitars. They can write their sonnets. They can do this kind of stuff, and they would be, relieved of that kind of material necessity. It wouldn't be a luxurious form of life, but if they're willing to sacrifice, luxurious living, they would have a sensible basic minimum, and that I think would be good for arts and culture. The other thing is, I think that a universal basic income idea makes sense in the context of moving towards increased automation. And Yang has talked about that. And again, as the economy moves towards automation, you're going to be putting people out of work. You can't just let people who are put out of work starve. I mean, the ultimate absurdity of that would be a system where we go to complete automation, but there are no workers, and therefore there are no consumers. What are you going to do? Have robots that consume the products of other robots and then add zeros to the bank accounts of 12 oligarchs while the rest of humanity is just reduced to a boneyard? It's an utter absurdity. You would have to find a way of giving these people who are put out of work by machines the ability to consume the products of the machines and keep the economy going. This is the old principle of Say's law. You've got to pay the workers enough to buy the products they create, so the market clears, and that is something that a universal basic income could do. And imagine, one of the great retarding forces against technological progress is this question: what are we going to do if the machines put us out of work? This is where you get the word saboteur, right? Sabotage referred to people breaking machines in factories in the 19th century because they didn't want to be put out of business. I think it comes from it's a French term, and I think there were like weaving factories or something, and people would like break the looms, and this was sabotage. If you want to stop sabotaging technological progress, you have to give a universal basic income to everybody who's put out of work by progress. And eventually, isn't utopia a world where machines put us all out of work? Basically, where all the dirty, ugly jobs are done by machines, by robots, and people have leisure to do things like exploring the cosmos. It's the Star Trek economy, right? You've got the replicator creating your glass of Earl Grey tea at command, right? And what does that free people to do? It frees people to spread liberalism throughout the galaxy in the Star Trek universe. But it's an appealing vision. Because it frees mankind from economic necessity so that we can be fully creative and self-actualized beings. That is a kind of utopia that the social credit advocates who first came up with this universal basic income idea were looking towards. And let me tell you folks out there, in case you don't know this, social credit was an economic and political philosophy that came about in the interwar period and was the preferred economic and social philosophy of English-speaking fascists in the interwar period. And it actually influenced politics. There were social credit governments and parties in Canada and New Zealand and Australia. Ezra Pound was a social credit advocate, for instance, and many Anglophone rightists were actual social credit people. And so this idea of a universal basic income is actually something connected to a right-wing and quasi-fascistic critique of free market capitalism that really was very, very powerful in the interwar period.
Very interesting. Now the idea of in French we actually have a word for this. This idea has been around forever. We have the society of leisure. That's how we called it. It's the whole philosophical question of, are we at the point of productivity that is so amazing and so great that we actually don't need the economic system anymore? We don't need capitalism anymore. And we could, in theory, you could have such levels of productivity that it's trivial to maintain humans alive and to have grocery stores and to have beds and even to have homes for people. It might reach the point at some point where it's trivial. I don't think we're there. And I think that even if we're there, there is always a kind of race forward by evolution to pack whatever amount of space has been given. And we need to be very wise with this, because if we are headed toward a society of leisure, in other words, a society where it's not such a big deal to keep someone alive, and therefore we essentially give basic income to everyone, we have to be careful of what we'll let people do in that society, including their reproductive behavior. Because there is a maximal amount of space on Earth. No matter how productive you will be always facing with a kind of natural maximum, and people will be struggling for evolution in terms of packing that maximum. So the path that you are suggesting indeed is very fascistic, because I think it ultimately leads to reproductive control of some kind.
Well, yeah. One thing I talk about, and this is related to eugenics and also just to simple ecological considerations. Imagine that technological progress is unfettered from the main things that are holding it back. The main thing that holds back technological progress is cheap labor. This is another reason why we want to stop globalization, outsourcing, and immigration, because it lowers labor costs. Because traditionally, historically speaking, high labor costs are one of the main things that cause investment in automation. And we want machines to put us all out of work someday, right? And that means we have to keep the labor market tight to keep an incentive on industry to develop automation. But imagine that we create a world where it's like the Jetsons, and you've got robots doing everything, and basically you can consume as much as you want. Well, there are going to be absolute limits to consumption, namely ecological limits to consumption. And so, if we are living in a society where you can live a comfortable life with less and less work, right? Uh, we're going to have as a social an agenda of social policy to get people to take the productivity gains from technological progress, not in terms of increased consumption, because you can only drive so many cars and do this, and we live on a finite planet, right? We have to take the productivity gains in terms of leisure rather than stuff. If we can all live very comfortable lives on 5 hours of work a week, then we would have a lot of leisure time. Whereas, if you live in an economy where you're working 50 hours a week, but things are enormous, you have enormous productive capacity, well, you're going to have the capacity to consume more stuff than the planet can actually provide. So there would have to be a sort of built-in tendency towards working less because we can't just consume everything. So we take our productivity gains in terms of more free time. And that does raise all kinds of questions, though, about how humanity would deal with all that freedom. And we're not quite ready for that. But it would be good to have incentives in place, pressures in place for us to finally start taking those kinds of questions more seriously. And I think that once we start taking those kinds of questions more seriously, there's going to be a built-in tendency towards a more socially conservative value system, because we simply can't, how to put it, again, if everyone's just sort of a self-indulgent idiot with $1,000 a month, a lot of people are going to ruin their lives, and society is not going to look like utopia. It's going to look like a vast skid row. We don't want that to happen.
Absolutely. There's lots of people reacting in the crowd. People really love this discussion. They love talking about UBI. There's 3 super chats from Holomodor, and I will not read the rest of your name. I'm deleting all of your super chats, dude, because they all contain hate speech. And in fact, your YouTube nickname contains hate speech, and we cannot read that on YouTube. We will get punished, but thank you for your donations still. Colonel J says, "Hey, Papa, think you can get Norman Finkelstein on the show? They were on Jimmy Dore's show a couple of days ago." Well, maybe we can try, but this is someone that is very well known. I'm not sure he will want to come here. Steve Nenninger sends $20. He says UBI with no government expense would be $10K per month. UBI seems like it may be a way we can connect citizens with their money. I'm not sure what he means by with no government expense. It would be $10K per month. It would be $1K per month if we follow the Yang policy, right?
Yeah. I think maybe what he's thinking is that there would just be a whole lot more money available once we got rid of a lot of government overhead, and
Okay.
there's some truth to that, probably.
Yeah, James Warren says, Greg, what would it take for you to debate Spencer live on the state of the AR instead of all the Twitter infighting? Would be incredible.
Who?
Richard Spencer.
Yeah, I think he's kind of irrelevant at this point. And I found out that he blocked me some time ago on Twitter, so there's no Twitter infighting as far as I know.
Well, so there won't be any infighting. Well, I would say when he comes to this show, he's still making good numbers, just like you are. So I don't think that he's irrelevant. I think that he's doing well, at least based on my numbers here. Guess who sends?
Well, that's good to know.
Guess who sends $10? He says micro issues. When we're outnumbered, it won't matter. I saw and lived in places where we were outnumbered back in the 70s. Never mind now. Wake up. He's right, I believe.
Yeah, definitely.
Young Plung says, I don't care if Nick Fuentes doesn't like Greg Johnson. I still like him. He was the first intellectual I listened to that was also a statist. I don't think anyone cares if Nick Fuentes doesn't like Greg. So what's happening between you and Nick Fuentes? I'm not even aware of this.
I don't know. I don't follow Nick, so I wouldn't know what he thinks about me.
All right.
Oh yeah, I'm a really busy guy, and so I don't spend a lot of time following what other people are saying about me online. Anyway, so.
All right. Frank Sharp says Yang Gang is just a lame meme to attract edgy alt-right kids into joining the Democratic Party. It is, I believe it is to some extent, right? And perhaps there are people who have been predicting that this would become a problem for Andrew Yang, that essentially being associated with a kind of toxic crowd that has a history of being so toxic between themselves and so much infighting that ultimately it will make him fail. Do you think there's a chance of that happening?
No, I don't, honestly. I was interviewed by Business Insider about Yang and Trump recently, and I expect that practically nothing that I actually said in that interview will show up, so I'm just going to repeat it all here. But that was really one of the questions. I don't think that white nationalists liking Yang is going to be a problem for Yang. Yang has already disavowed us. Of course, he's going to do that. Most white nationalists would like to live in a country without any Andrew Yangs. He's an Asian guy. He's finding it a little weird that all these white nationalists like him. Of course, white nationalists tend to, at least some of us, have a carve out for Asians. We find Asians to be the most agreeable non-white group.
Do you know how I turned his rejection of white nationalists? Do you know how I turned it positive for us? I said, no, that he said, you are not welcome here. This guy is an isolationist. He told white nationalists, you're not welcome. And I said, well, at least he masters this classical sentence from American History X.
Yes. There's an in and an out, but of course, all the Democrats believe that too. But here's the thing: he's still going to cash our checks, and the fact that the alt-right, are white nationalists, Donald Trump actually was moved to say that white nationalists are a small group with a lot of problems, and that's really true. We're a small group and we have a lot of problems. And a lot of the problems that we have are due to the decline of white people, due to white dispossession, due to globalization and immigration and multiculturalism. And we were rather hoping that the Trump administration would help us with some of those problems. And he's turned his back on us, and we're turning our backs on him. And there are a lot of problem people, but white people have a lot of problems. And I think white nationalists are the most sensitive whites to this. We're not monsters. We're just ahead of the curve, right? We're the canaries in the coal mine. We're the ones most sensitized to the hell on earth that awaits white people as we become minorities in all of our homelands. And there are a lot of problem people in this movement. That said, we're becoming united around Yang. And so the warring tribes, I think, are putting aside some of their differences and pulling for Yang. There's a lot of fun and energy in this Yang stuff. The Yang memes are off the charts hilarious. It's just great stuff. So I feel like some of the magic of 2015 and 2016 is coming back when everyone was excited about Trump. And we were using the Trump campaign as an occasion to push our talking points forward. And a lot of our people got sort of lost in the Trump cult of personality. And, the point is that we should always be using politicians and not let politicians use us. We want these politicians to advance our agendas. And the ones in our crowd who kept that principle, we dropped Trump as soon as he dropped us, as soon as he made it clear that he was betraying us and going Republican, we were, boom, that was it. Now, and Yang has come along. He's advancing certain things that we like, and pragmatically, we are going to align with this Chinese guy. I think it's kind of brilliant. I think it's a sign of political maturity on our part. Also, Donald Trump was elected by a razor thin margin, 107,000 voters in 3 states, right? Michigan, Wisconsin, was it Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania? 107,000 voters. Now, when elections are really close, small groups matter.
Mm-hmm.
The white nationalist community in 2016 was smaller than it is today, I believe. I know this to be true because white dispossession is pushing people in our direction all the time, and it's been ongoing for the last 2 years. There are more people who are thinking our way than ever before. We're a larger group now than we were in 2016, and we were a very important group. We were very important in 2 ways: in the whole meme war, especially against the Republican cucks, but also because we were well organized. We were involved in efforts to vote, to get people to vote, and to suppress voter fraud, including in those 3 states where 107,000 votes was the margin of victory for Donald Trump. He knows that he will not win in 2020 without us. He can diss us all he wants, but he knows, or he should know, somebody should have told him, that we were the margin. We tipped the balance. And we're not going to do that for him. But there are more of us now than ever before. We feel energized and excited. We're cooperating. The fun is back. And we're focusing on Yang. We can put the guy in the White House, even if he doesn't want us to. And that's kind of an interesting and exciting phenomenon. The white nationalist scene, this online viral alt-right network that emerged in 2014, 2015, and crested in 2016, that is a small number of highly creative people, and it always punched above its numerical weight. And I feel that magic is coming back, and so I think the things are going to get really, really interesting in this election cycle. I'm registering Democrat. I'm going to vote for Yang in the primaries. My father, who's now dead, would be very pleased. He was a lifelong Democrat and a union member who carried a lunch bucket to work. He'd be very pleased with this news. I've finally come home to the Democratic Party.
I mean, the famous far right has never been right-wing economically. So it's all natural that it's going to be an easy transfer from Republicans to Democrats because we are located out there in the spectrum of politics, being named right-wingers when we're not for real. It's a natural return. Now you were asking, you were saying someone should tell Trump that he won't be doing it without the nationalist right. I think you are right, but I think there may be no one left around Trump to be telling him that. After he got rid of Steve Bannon, most of his alt-right wing of counselors are gone, and he even dissed Ann Coulter on Twitter. So he's out there. He's been abandoning us, and to some extent, I was wondering, is it because he doesn't want to win 2020? Is that possible?
I honestly don't know. I do think that he's not a stupid man. I think he's somewhat chaotic and unfocused. I think his real weakness is lack of character. I believe he was absolutely sincere when he raised these populist issues in the campaign, for the very simple reason that he could have won without ever touching them. If he had just Xeroxed Jeb Bush's platform and sold it with Donald Trump's personality, he would have won. He would have won the nomination, and he would have won the presidency. But instead, he ended up fighting a grueling two-front war against the Democrats and his own party because he believed these issues were important. But once he got in office, he didn't have the moral seriousness, the courage, whatever, the character was lacking to actually carry these things through. So the man is a mystery to me. I don't know what he wants, but he might be counting on the following thing. And this is something that we need to take into account. He can afford to lose people on the far quote unquote right fringe of his support base, because the sheer insanity of the Democratic candidates being fielded will drive a lot of centrist white people towards him, right? So he might lose some of his supporters, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Kamala Harris and all these other people, these scary, loony, evil, hateful people, they obviously hate white people, a lot of these colored ultra leftists. And I think that as these people get more and more excited and they talk more about this kind of stuff, they're going to actually cause centrists, white centrists especially, to move towards Trump. So he might be calculating that he can lose us and still get in the White House by gaining these people. At this point, I do believe that the presidency is the Democrats to lose, but they're so stupid that they could lose it. They're so crazy. They're so high on their own supply. They're so wrapped up in hating white people and hating America, and the mask of sanity has long ago been abandoned, that they might lose it. And they've already lost it in terms of their sanity, right? But they might lose the election.
Wonderful. Frank Carr says, reduce consumption, tell this commie to fuck off. LM says, well, Greg is smart and all, but he would be more persuasive if he was a little less long-winded. He throws out a lot of stuff and idiots can't follow. Personally, I like the rhythm of Greg, so I'm not following you on your super chat. Greg, whenever he's on the show, we have very high like rates, and this tells me that the majority of the crowd enjoys the whole thing. Holomodar sends $20, and he says that Commissioner Gulagstein, who was a long-time super chatter of the show, was censored because he posted a gaming style edit of the New Zealand footage. Well, Holodomor, what did you think there? Of course, you don't post these modified versions of the New Zealand shooting. It is disrespectful and hateful. Thanks for your donation, though. Chuck Ford says, what does Greg think of Patrick Little?
I met him. I met him last summer. Hung out with him a little bit. I don't think that he's. I don't think he's a bad person, and I think he's sincere. I think he's sort of high energy. I think he's intelligent. He's very, very focused on the Jewish question. And I don't see any harm in him being out there, staking his place and talking about this. So there are a lot of people who are hating on Patrick Little. I'm not one of those people. He praised my manifesto, which I think shows good judgment on his part, because I'm very proud of that book. It's a good book.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Patrick Little he's okay by me. We just have kind of a different style and a different focus. I don't think he's doing bad things. I don't think he's wasting his life or bringing discredit to the broader milieu. But I don't have a lot of contact, but I did meet him summer of last year in San Francisco. Hung out with him and a couple of his supporters. I'm not going to say anything bad about Patrick Little, because I haven't seen anything bad about Patrick Little.
Wonderful. And finally, the New Zealand shooting. I guess we can talk a little bit about it, and then I will be releasing you. I have a couple of solo news items I want to cover. The New Zealand shooting has been occurring, I believe, 7 days ago. It was an attack on Muslims in 2 mosques in New Zealand. it appears from the manifesto that it was from someone who was very much aware of the online subcultures that relate to the alt-right. There's people telling me, Jeff, I think that it will be an impediment on the alt-right, on the progression of the right wing or the nationalist right on the internet. Personally, I don't think it will. I think it will have close to no impact, or possibly even some exposure impact. What do you think?
Yeah, well, whenever somebody does one of these things, and it happens with depressing frequency now, I pull out this boilerplate article called Understanding the Something Something Massacre and put it up. So I've basically rewritten this article after Dylan Roof, after the Sikh temple massacre, after Bowers went shooting in that synagogue, and so on and so forth. I give my reasons why. I think this is bad from a moral, strategic, and tactical point of view. But I also say that we have to recognize that we believe that increased diversity causes conflict, and conflict causes bloodshed. And the way to prevent more of these rampages is to pull back from this vast undemocratic social engineering experiment of turning white people into minorities in their own homelands. That is what's causing this violence. This violence will continue until that underlying cause is addressed. And every time one of these things happens, though, it's used as an excuse by the establishment to try and shut down debate on the very problem that's causing it. And of course, that's what you'd expect. These people are creating conflict and bloodshed, and they cannot take responsibility for it, and they're trying to shut down debate. It's fine to go and arrest people for terrorism. It is not right. It is very foolish to try and suppress us, suppress debate, and that's what they're doing. And so, my message to people out there who might be thinking of doing something like this is don't. Whatever you do, don't, right? Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't take up arms and go shooting people, especially in a place of worship. Where in the world did people get the idea that that's like the best place to go shooting people? That's where people are like their most vulnerable. I guess that's why. But it's also a place where people are most sympathetic to normie onlookers, right? Why do that? Why choose that? But if you're thinking of doing that, don't. And for this very reason, white nationalists win every argument that's fair. In every fair debate, we win. White dispossession and globalization are trends that are pushing more and more people in our direction and opening more and more people's eyes and ears and minds to our message. The longer we can stay in the political debate, and that means stay on YouTube, on the internet, and so forth, the longer we can stay in the debate, the more people we're going to win over. And once we get to a certain tipping point, then we're going to change things. And the last thing we need are people going out with a false sense of urgency. Like, if we had to do something today and something bloody, it's through. It's not that urgent. We've got decades ahead of us to turn this mess around. Okay. This false sense of urgency is an excuse for behaving in a stupid and self-defeating way. We have to stay in the political game, in the political conversation, and keep changing minds. And if we do that, we win. So people like Tarrant, I think, are counterproductive. They are making it easier for our enemies to gin up a storm of censorship, a moral panic that will allow them to drive through policies that basically take away our freedom of speech and our guns. And we don't want that to happen. Again, because the longer we stay in the political debate, the closer we are to winning.
Absolutely. And I think that as our minorization becomes a fact more and more, our ideas, they just get more valid. They just, the truth looks to people, and people will be forced to realize, oh, these people who were telling us that whites were becoming a minority 20 years ago, they were right, and they were visionary in some way. So I think that, like you, I think that time is on our side. Greg, it was a great pleasure talking to you, and we'll do that again very soon. For those who want to go see you speak at the Scanza Forum, the link is in the description below. It is in Stockholm on March 30, right?
Yes, that's correct. And if you want to read my writing, go to counter-currents.com.